I'm sorry, I need to ask you something that might make you a little uneasy. If a super intelligent AI analyzed everything about you, your emails, your text messages, your voice notes, your calendar, your sleep patterns, your heart rate, the words you choose when you're stressed, and the ones you avoid when you're tired, would it actually fully understand you? Would this AI comprehend who you really are? Would it see the real you? Think about it for a second, or two, or five. Would it see the real you? Or would it simply become extremely good at predicting what you're likely to do next? Because those two things are not the same. And still we keep pretending that they are. Prediction is not understanding. Pattern recognition is not insight. And data is not meaning. We behave, I think, as if knowing what someone will do is the same thing as understanding why they do it. And that mistake doesn't just affect technology. It affects relationships, leadership, parenting, conflict, trust, everything. In fact, it explains a surprising number of everyday misunderstandings between people who are intelligent, well-intentioned, and genuinely trying to do the right thing. I mean, here's the uncomfortable part. Most conflicts don't happen because people are malicious or evil. They happen because we assume that others experience the world in roughly the same way that we do. And then we are astonished when they don't. Stay tuned, and I will the next few minutes show you exactly what could go wrong and how to avoid it permanently. You do not need a degree in neither psychology or AGI programming. You just need to pay attention for about a half an hour or so. What does it look like when communication goes sideways? Here are a few examples of the usual suspects. We think we're being clear, they think we're being cold. We think we are being efficient, they think we are being insensitive. We think we're being honest, they think we're being aggressive. We think we're being funny, they think we're being unserious. And both sides walk away slightly confused, slightly irritated, and quietly convinced that the other person just doesn't get it. And this is what it usually looks like. Now add some AI to this picture. Machines are getting better every day at analyzing behavior, no doubt. Faster than any human ever could, perhaps. They can detect patterns, preferences, correlations, probabilities. They can tell what people tend to do. However, understanding human behavior has never really been about prediction. It's about origins. It's about interpretation. It's about the invisible layers that just sit there beneath what we see on the surface. And unless we understand those layers in ourselves and in others, we will keep misunderstanding each other. Not just occasionally, but systematically. So before we talk about labels, types, or colors, or tools, we need to ask a more fundamental question. Why did we end up the way we are in the first place? What happened? Why did we end up the way we are? This is actually one of the most common questions I get in podcasts and from people when I'm at book signings and so on. Why are people so different? Wouldn't it be so much easier if we were all the same? Then we wouldn't have to try to read each other's minds all the time. Why does one person walk into a room and instinctively take charge, without asking permission, without scanning the room, without even realizing they're doing it, while another person enters the same room and quietly reads the atmosphere before saying even a single word? Why does one person relax when rules, structure, and clarity are present, while another feels almost physically constrained by the very same things? And perhaps the most irritating question of them all, especially if you care about communication, why can two intelligent adults hear the same sentence in the same tone of voice, in the same context, from the same individual, and walk away with completely different interpretations of what was said? This is where most explanations become superficial, and also where most misunderstandings quietly begin. So why are people different? The short answer is the one you've heard many times before: nature versus nurture. But the real answer is far more interesting and far more useful than that tired phrase actually suggests. Long before we had opinions, political views, preferences, ambitions, or LinkedIn profiles, something else was already in motion. The foundations of our adult behavior were laid before we were even born. I mean, temperament, reactivity, energy levels, risk tolerance, curiosity. These are not things we consciously choose. They are biological starting point, and then life gets hold of them. Of course, we inherit traits not only from our parents, but from generations before them, in ways we can sometimes recognize and often can't recognize. You've probably heard someone say, "You laugh exactly like your grandfather," or "You're just like your aunt." In my case, I was told I resembled my Uncle Bertil. Apparently it was the red hair. Now, explaining how this works genetically would take far longer than this video allows, sure. I mean, genetics is messy, it's complex, and still not fully understood. Scientists still argue about mechanisms, triggers, expressions. I am for sure no biologist. On one thing there is a little disagreement. It matters. This inheritance does not dictate who we will become. It doesn't lock us into a fixed personality or a predetermined future. No, but it does something equally important. It sets the starting point. Think of it like this. It's a starting point. It's a set of built-in tendencies, such as, for example, how strongly we react to stimulation or stress, how quickly we take initiative or hesitate, how much uncertainty we tolerate before becoming uncomfortable, how much social interaction energizes us or drains us, how naturally we seek structure versus demanding freedom. Worth to keep in mind here, none of these tendencies are necessarily good or bad in themselves. They're just different, and they shape how we experience the world long before we begin making conscious choices. And here's where many people go wrong. We like to believe that everyone starts roughly from the same place and then makes different choices. That idea feels fair, it feels democratic, it feels slightly comforting. Yeah, I understand that. It also has a name, the tabula rasa theory, the idea that we are born as blank slates and become who we are purely through experiences, has been remarkably popular for centuries. And it's easy to see why. If everyone starts the same, then success and failure feel morally tidy. Responsibility is simple. Differences can be explained without discomfort. This idea of the tabula rasa is most strongly associated with a man named John Locke. He introduced it in his work, An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, from 1690. That's a while ago. Simply put, very simply put, Locke argued that the human mind at birth is a blank slate and that knowledge and understanding come from experiences, through sensation and reflection, rather than than we're being born with something, actually. That said, the idea of tabula rasa itself is older than Locke, actually. No other than Aristotle himself hinted at something similar when he described the mind as a tablet on which nothing is written. A number of medieval thinkers later picked up on the metaphor, but Locke was the one who systemized it, let's say, popularized it, and turn it into this foundational idea in psychology and in education. The idea of the human mind as a tabula rasa is a beautiful idea philosophically speaking, but a very problematic one psychologically. The biggest problem is the theory isn't true. Anyone who has spent time with more than one newborn knows this. Even before language, before rules, before conditioning, children differ. Some are calm, some are more intense, some explore fearlessly, others observe cautiously. Some demand stimulation all the time, others retreat from it. Those differences are not taught, they are, revealed, let's say. Experience shapes us without question, but it does not start from zero. It works on top of something that is already there. Believing in a blank slate doesn't make us fairer, it makes us confused, really, especially when people fail to respond the way we think they should. And that confusion is often the starting point of unnecessary judgment. What about the balance between nature and nurture? Is it 50-50? Is it 40-60? Maybe 60-40? More problems coming our way. These numbers differ depending on who you're asking. Let's, for the sake of argument, say that it's somewhere in the vicinity of 50-50. But that could also be wrong. We just don't know for sure. But let's argue like that. Anyways, people start from different internal conditions, okay? Different sensitivities, different thresholds, different ways of responding to the world, and then they begin making choices within those constraints. Understanding that doesn't divide us, but it explains us. Once you really accept that people start from different internal conditions, you begin to notice something else. Certain differences show up again and again and again. Some people are driven by momentum, they want things to happen. They speak quickly, decide quickly, become very restless when things slow down. Others are driven by connection. They think out loud, they read emotional cues instinctively and care deeply about how decisions affect the people involved. Others feel the safest when there is a structure, logic, clarity. They want to understand why before they act, and they trust systems more than improvisation. Another group of people value stability, predictability. They avoid unnecessary conflict, prefer harmony over confrontation, and often carry more responsibility than anyone realizes. Now, these are not moods, they're not strategies, and they are certainly not good or bad. Who's right and who's wrong? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. You see, it doesn't really matter more than we have to understand it's different. If you listen closely, you'll recognize these differences everywhere. I mean, who speaks first when a group hesitates? Who asks questions before acting? Who focuses on people first and tasks second, or the other way around? Who becomes very, very highly impatient with uncertainty? Who becomes uneasy when harmony is disrupted? I would say most people don't need a theory to recognize these patterns. They've been living with them, often struggling with them for years, usually decades. These patterns are recurring behavioral tendencies, visible across cultures, across professions, across generations. Most of us recognize at least one of them instantly, usually in ourselves, often in the people we struggle most to understand. And once you grasp that, a lot of human behavior suddenly stops feeling so random, really. What happens after we're born? Excellent question. Children are indeed fascinating little creatures. They arrive impulsive, fearless, emotionally honest, and almost entirely unconcerned with social approval. A child says no because they mean no. They say yes because they genuinely believe they can do it. They have no understanding of the concept of failure. None. Have you seen a kid trying to learn how to stand up or learning how to walk? They focus on that single task for months until they have managed it. Usually no one tells them to stop either. Stop trying, just sit down for the rest of your life. I'm going to drive you around. No, don't. No one does that. I mean, kids live in a world where limitations have not yet been negotiated, explained, or enforced. They haven't heard about those things. Forget about all that. No. In that sense, children are not difficult. They are simply, well, unfiltered. But then, inevitably, reality intervenes. Parents, teachers, siblings, schools, institutions, unspoken rules. Slowly, persistently, that raw, original behavior begins to change. Sometimes lovingly, sometimes pragmatically, sometimes out of a need for control, sometimes out of fear, frankly. I mean, certain traits are encouraged and reinforced. Others are corrected, redirected, or quietly actually discouraged. Some behaviors are praised, others are punished, directly or indirectly, rarely with bad intentions, often with very good ones. However, what started as an original behavior gradually becomes something else. In the best case, it becomes a refined version of the same core tendencies. In the worst case, it becomes a pale copy of what was required to survive, to fit in, or to succeed in a particular environment. And I think that's the crucial point here. This process doesn't happen once, it happens repeatedly. Every new context teaches us something about which parts of ourselves are welcome and which ones are not. Over time, we begin to adjust more than we realize. How openly do we express emotion? How directly do we speak? How much space do we take or give away? How comfortable are we with disagreeing? How much of ourselves do we reveal? None of these adjustments are inherently wrong. No, they are often necessary, but taken together, they quietly shape the way we show up in the world. We learn when to speak, we learn when to stay quiet. We learn when to take charge, and we learn when to wait. We learn when to be expressive, and we learn when to control ourselves. Over time, we become, hopefully, very good at adjusting. This isn't tragic, it's human, but it's rarely neutral, right? There is a saying, often repeated, rarely examined, that we are born as originals and die as copies. Well, maybe. Sounds dramatic, almost cynical. But there is this uncomfortable amount of truth hidden inside of this. No one is born trying to fit in. No child arrives preoccupied with being acceptable, appropriate, or on brand. Those concerns are learned slowly through feedback, expectations, consequences. What begins as adaptation can over time turn into repetition, into habits we no longer question, into ways of behaving that once helped us belong, but that we later confuse with who we actually are. I mean, most people don't consciously decide to become copies of anything. They simply respond to what the world seems to reward, right? I think we all have been through that process. And the more often a certain behavior works, the more permanent it becomes, of course, until eventually it feels natural. Because while adaptation helps us function in society, it also teaches us something else, sometimes without noticing. It teaches us that being ourselves is not always beneficial. Psychology has been arguing about nature versus nurture for well over a century. And if you read enough academic papers, you can easily come away with the impression that no one agrees on anything ever. Fortunately, that is not quite true. While researchers still debate mechanisms, emphasis, and terminology, there is a broad agreement on one fundamental point. Human behavior is not the result of either nature or nurture. It is the result of this interaction between the two. I mentioned the tabula rasa theory previously, but now we're talking about how nature and nurture interacts, so to speak. Behavior emerges from a continuous interplay between biological, psychological, and social factors, all influencing one another in ways that are sometimes very obvious and very often completely invisible. From a biological perspective, our brains, our nervous systems, and our chemistry play a significant role in how we process information, how quickly we react, how we handle stress, how we communicate with others. Even factors such as nutrition, sleep, which were ignored for a very long time, are now known to have a far greater impact on cognition and emotional regulation than previously assumed. Interesting, huh? Psychologically, our upbringing, our experiences, our internal narratives shape the way we understand the world around us. Two people can experience the same event and draw entirely different conclusions from it. Not because one is right and the other one is wrong, no, but because they are filtering this experience through different internal frameworks formed over time. Socially, we are influenced, often more than we realize, by culture, by norms, by expectations, and by all these unspoken rules. These forces quietly tell us what is acceptable, what is rewarded, and what is discouraged. We absorb them early, adapt them quickly, rarely stop to question them once they feel normal. They will start to feel normal. This is why context matters so much, I would say. Change the context and behavior often changes with it. You've seen this effect whenever someone takes on a leadership role for the first time, or someone who moves from one organizational culture to another, or someone who enters a close personal relationship. Someone who becomes a parent for the first time, or someone who suddenly finds themselves under sustained pressure, constant pressure. The behavior changes, not because the person has become someone else, but because different demands are now activating different responses. Makes perfect sense, really. People behave differently when they change jobs, enter new relationships, move to another country, or join a group where the rules, spoken or unspoken, are different. Sure, these shifts can be subtle, can be dramatic, temporary or long-lasting. It depends. And again, people doesn't suddenly become someone else. But different parts of them are being activated. You've seen this in yourself, I'm sure, even if you never put words to it. I mean, you have noticed how you behave one way around certain people and another way around others, without feeling dishonest in either situation. You're one edition of you when you're in love, and another one when you're angry, of course. You show one version of you when you talk to your father and another one when you talk to your mother-in-law. Why is that? Because you're smart. Speaking of which, you felt how some environments seem to bring out your best qualities almost effortlessly, while others leave you tense, guarded, or strangely muted. You have probably recognized versions of yourself that only appear in specific contexts, at work, at home, in conflict, under pressure, or when you finally feel safe enough to relax. None of these versions are necessarily fake, but neither do they all tell the whole story. And if you're honest, you have likely seen the same thing in other people. Someone who appears confident and decisive in one setting becomes hesitant and more withdrawn in another. Someone who seems calm and reasonable suddenly reacts strongly when a particular value is challenged, let's say. Once you start noticing this, it becomes difficult to unsee them. Behavior stops looking random, starts looking situational, not arbitrary, but responsive more. And this distinction is crucial. You see, understanding where behavior comes from does not excuse bad behavior. It doesn't. Explaining is not the same thing as justifying, but explanation does something equally important. It replaces moral judgment with clarity. And clarity is almost always the first step away from conflict and towards understanding. Deep inside each of us sit our core values. It's not opinions or strategies. They are not things we can casually just adjust. These things are moral and emotional anchors formed very early in life, often before we were even capable of speaking about them. Core values tend to show up in very specific ways. They feel obvious to us, which is why we rarely question them. We don't experience them as choices, but as self-evident truths about what is right and what is wrong. They are emotionally charged. When a core value is violated by ourselves or by others, the reaction is immediate and often disproportionate to the situation. Core values are also remarkably stable over time. Jobs change, relationships change, circumstances change, but core values tend to remain quite intact. They operate beneath conscious thought. We often notice them only after we reacted, not before, and they resist external pressure. You can comply outwardly, but internally the value remains untouched, probably strengthened rather. In my own case, these values included ideas such as study hard, do your job properly, and violence is wrong. The last one in particular has been consistent throughout my life. I have never laid a hand on another person. The last time I tried in 3rd grade, I lost. She was really strong. These values are not up for debate, at least not internally. They just are. And no amount of external pressure truly removes them. At best they are suppressed, at worst they are ignored. But they do not disappear. Then come attitudes. That's different. Unlike core values, these are not formed at the very beginning of life. They emerge later, shaped by experience, reinforced by interpretation. Attitudes are built through success and failure, through disappointment and reward, through observation and conclusion. I mean, school leaves its marks. Early jobs leave their marks. Relationships, conflicts, role models, moments of embarrassment or pride all leave traces. Over time, these traces solidify into opinions about how the world works, how people behave, and what can be expected from others. And here's an inconvenient truth. Once attitudes finally form themselves, we don't necessarily change them very much. These things tend to be fixed through life. There are exceptions, sure, but you get my point. Not because we are stubborn in a conscious sense, but because attitudes help us make sense of the world. They give us shortcuts, reduce uncertainty, they tell us what to expect, and expectations are comforting, even when they are wrong, basically. This is why most new experiences don't actually change our attitudes, they just confirm them. I mean, think about it. 2 people with completely different views can still live through the same situation, observe the same behavior, hear the same words from the same person, the same context, and walk away more convinced than ever that they were right all along. The experience doesn't challenge the attitude, it is interpreted through it. Attitudes tend to show up in very recognizable patterns, actually. They sound like certainty rather than curiosity. They rely on past experience as proof of future truth. They resist nuance and they dislike ambiguity. They filter new information instead of absorbing it. Attitudes feel personal even when they are inherited or borrowed, frankly. Now, none of this makes us irrational. Or, well, in a way, I guess it does. But mostly it makes us human. And it does explain why disagreement so often turns into misunderstandings, and why discussions that begin with curiosity sometimes, often, end with people quietly reinforcing their own positions instead of learning anything new. Okay, we talked about values, we talked about attitudes. When values and attitudes come together, they shape what I call our core behavior. This is the person you believe yourself to be. This is who you think you are. It's the behavior that feels natural rather than forced, effortless rather than calculated. It feels honest rather than, well, strategic. This is relatively close to the real you, I would say, but core behavior is not what you perform, it is what you return to. It shows up when there is no immediate need to impress, to adapt, or to defend yourself. It's how you think, how you decide, how you react when you feel relatively safe and unobserved, or at least when you believe that you are. And here is the problem. We are almost never free from external influence, right? Unless you are asleep, I guess. Even in moments of apparent calm. I mean, reading a book, sitting on the couch, relaxing on a Sunday afternoon. Other people, expectations, responsibilities are present in our minds, right? Someone may need something from us now. Someone may be watching. Someone may have an opinion. Even imagined observers shape how we behave. I probably should not just sit here doing nothing, reading a book. Sure. What if someone comes along and sees me? They probably have questions. I better read faster. Or better make some use of myself. I met people who claim not to care. They say things like, I don't care what others think. True or false? Let's say it's true. They behave the same way everywhere, in every situation, regardless of context or consequence. There is, of course, something undeniably liberating about that. But there is also something very, very risky, because perception matters. How are you perceived by others? Well, this determines whether your intentions are understood or misunderstood, whether your, let's say, your competence is recognized or questioned. You wouldn't like that. And whether your behavior builds trust or quietly erodes trust. This is where tension enters the picture. Core behavior feels authentic, but it is rarely sufficient on its own. Social life requires adjustment. Cooperation requires sensitivity. Leadership especially requires awareness of how behavior lands, not just how it feels internally. No. This is why core behavior, while important, is not the whole story, and why understanding it is only the beginning. What we usually see in other people is not their core behavior, but their adapted behavior. Adapted behavior is shaped by context. It is a response to a situation, and an interpretation of what seems to be required, and a choice, conscious or unconscious, about how to act. You can think of it as a mask, not in the sense of deception, but in the sense of adjustment. You put it on in order to fit in. We all have several of them. There is a work mask, there is a home mask, there is often a different one for friends, neighbors, and for many people a particularly well-rehearsed one for visiting the in-laws. That is not hypocrisy. It is called social competence, people skills. Very smart. The important thing to understand here is that different people placed in the same situation will often put on different masks. They interpret the same surroundings in very different ways, and then they adapt accordingly. One person becomes more direct, another more cautious. One takes charge, another steps back. One speaks more, another listens more. This is where most misunderstandings live, I would say. We react to what we see, not to what lies beneath. And because adapted behavior is very situational, it can easily be misread as personality. We mistake a response for a trait, a role for an identity, and a moment for a pattern. This is why a simple framework can be surprisingly helpful. Here is how I would like to describe this. Behavior can be understood as a function of personality and surrounding factors. It's just a simple formula that explains quite a lot. Behavior equals personality times surrounding factors. In other words, behavior is what we can observe, what we can see with our own eyes. Personality is what we are trying to understand based on what we see. Surrounding factors are the variables that are constantly changing the context, the pressure, the expectations, the people involved. I mean, we influence one another all the time. Fine. Very often without realizing it. Sure, a comment, a look, a deadline, some kind of power imbalance. Any of this can shift how someone behaves in a given moment. The real skill then is not to take behavior at face value, but instead to learn to look beneath the surface, to ask not only what someone is doing, but why this particular behavior makes sense to them in this particular situation. And in fact, that shift alone reduces a remarkable amount of unnecessary conflict. Why does this matter? Another great question. Who wrote this? This is really good. So good. Some people object to categorizing behavior. They repeat things like, we shouldn't put people in boxes. They argue that labels are dangerous, that they reduce individuals to stereotypes, and that they encourage lazy thinking. I understand this notion. When such tools are used carelessly or without humility, things can go terribly wrong, for sure. But you see, noticing differences has never been the real problem. So what is the real problem? Well, the real problem is ignoring these differences. That's the problem. This idea of not putting people in boxes sounds a bit like we shouldn't pretend there are differences between different types of people. Well, I hate to break it to you, my friend. There are lots of them, frankly. The trick is to use this intel the right way, not to judge people, but to understand, to adapt. I mean, we notice differences instinctively. We always have. The question is not whether we see them, but how we interpret them and what we do with this interpretation. Without a thoughtful framework, differences tend to turn into assumptions, and assumptions quietly harden into judgments. Now, this matters more now than at any other point in our recent history. We live in a world where artificial intelligence can write emails, analyze tone, recognize facial expressions, and even simulate empathy with surprising accuracy. Machines are becoming exceptionally good at detecting patterns in human behavior, but pattern recognition is not the same thing as understanding. Machines can, for sure, tell what people are likely to do. They will, though, never understand why it matters to us humans. Meaning, intention, value, context still belong to the human domain, and that responsibility has not been outsourced, even if we sometimes behave as though it has. If we don't learn how people actually differ in temperament, in motivation, perception, we will continue to misread each other. Only now we will do it faster, at greater scale, and with more sophisticated technology, amplifying every misunderstanding. Not good. The risk is not that machines become more human. The risk is that humans stop trying to understand each other. I think this is very, very important. Before you go, a few things to take with you. I would like to summarize this to you in the following way. If you take nothing else with you from this, take these few ideas with you. People do not start from the same internal conditions. Okay? Temperament, biology create different starting points long before conscious choice enters the picture. Behaviors is not the same as personality. What you see is an adaptation to context, not a reflection of who someone fundamentally is. Core values tend to remain stable, while attitudes are shaped and reinforced by experiences and are far harder to change than we like to believe. What else? Misunderstandings arise not from bad intentions, but from different interpretations of the same situations. Context activates different parts of the same person. A change in behavior does not necessarily mean a change in character, no, but understanding behavioral differences does not excuse poor behavior, it does replace judgment with clarity. None of this is about putting people in boxes. No, it's about learning to look beneath the surface in others and in yourself before reacting. So, my friend, if this resonates with you, then you already know something very important. Human behavior isn't random, but it isn't obvious either. In a world increasingly shaped by artificial intelligence, those who truly understand people, not just systems, tools, or data, they will have an enormous advantage. Not just professionally, but personally. Because clarity changes how we listen. It changes how we respond and how we judge each other. I put together a deeper exploration of this in my video series on understanding human behaviors. It goes further into why we clash, why we misunderstand one another, and how we can navigate a world where technology keeps accelerating while human nature remains stubbornly human. You can find the link right here. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends and your family. If you would considering subscribing to this channel, I would truly appreciate it, maybe more than you might think. Thank you for watching.